Hey everyone, in this video, I'm going to have a discussion with you on what I consider to be a yogic practice and more generally a Vedic practice and even more generally a religious practice that is often undermined relatively to practices like asana, pranayama, ishvara pranidhana, prayer, meditation, etc. This practice is none other than introspection and self-analysis. I believe that introspection and self analysis is often neglected among practitioners or even, people in general. It is something that, if not practiced along with the other practices, in fact, the yogic lifestyle, as definitely displayed by Patanjali and different authors in Yoga Shastra, it could be incomplete if self analysis is not done. Self analysis and introspection, that is, deeply understanding the inner workings of your narrative, your ego, your sense of self, your emotions, your feelings, your sensations, and perceptions that are occurring inside of your body and your mind. If these are neglected, then what progress is being made? See, this beautiful phrase, spiritual bypassing, emerged in the mid 1900s, perhaps late 1900s, that discussed religious individuals who pray and go to religious institutions, so on and so forth, engage their religious traditions, but do not work on themselves, disregard their inner habits, their conditioning. And so this results in often dangerous relationships, whether it's interdependently or when it comes to larger scale issues. You develop religious individuals with personality disorders. You develop religious individuals who are toxic, right? Who are avoiding their issues but practicing things to the T, right? And so this becomes problematic to the onlooker who is analyzing a religious tradition and sees these individuals like this who are showing one element but then completely neglecting the inner world, and then often gets absorbed into it and forms, through the use of words like sangha, community, so forth, right? Uh, they get caught up in certain things. Now, the word satsanga is extremely important, right? Extremely important community, but depends on the quality of the community. If you have a bunch of people avoiding their problems and just chanting all day and praying, then hey, you have to. It's going to be problematic. It's going to be like just dismissing issues all day, every day, and so that needs to be addressed. And so, I would say that within the Vedic tradition, within the Hindu tradition, yogic tradition, so on and so forth, introspection is an intrinsic, pretty much extremely crucial component to the tradition, to the practice, self-analysis. Now, it's sprinkled throughout the different texts. You're not going to see the text constantly talking about know yourself in the sense of your narrative, your egoic self. Know your egoic self. Know your egoic self. It's mostly know your true self. Know your Atman. Know your Purusha. You'll see that everywhere. But you don't see too much about knowing your narrative self. Now, we could say that it's because they forgot about it, which I don't think is the case. I think it's probably implied, since it's sprinkled in there, that one should know their narrative self, their egoic self, in the process of trying to find as these traditions say, the true self, the Atman, Purusha, Paramatman, Brahman, etc. So it is so costly not to understand one's inner world. That is, when you feel a fear, when you feel embarrassment, when you feel anger, when you feel frustration, even happiness, enjoyment, where is it coming from? What is the source from which it emerged? What are the outside circumstances that led to this feeling, right? How can I prevent this feeling? These analyses are so important. And the more they're practiced, the more accurately you'll be able to identify these emotions. You'll be able to identify them just like that. But people are often discouraged because it hurts, it's scary, and they can't identify it quickly. And so it involves practice and inner grit. I mean, strength inside to look into yourself and identify all the different phenomena that are occurring, because you're going to identify your patterns and conditioning that are maladaptive and that are not good for you. Put a stop to them, or at least work on putting a stop to them so that your future is more clear and the decisions you make are not conditioned so much by bad influences or unhelpful influences. It's something that is seemingly your own will that is doing everything towards it. And so the phenomenon in yoga, we can say the word svadhyaya, but often the word svadhyaya emphasizes scriptural study, but there is also self-study. But studying the self-analysis is so important, but for some reason it's become rare today in communities. People are not really emphasizing it as much, from what I understand. In some communities, there are some communities that really emphasize self-analysis, but the ego always creeps in some way, right? But I think that within the yogic tradition, or any Indian philosophical tradition for that matter, that introduces any sort of term, whether it's cognition or introspection or, perception, whatever it is, we can refine those terms in the next 50, for what's happened in, the past 100 or 150 years through psychology, through biology, through chemistry, through sociology, all these different disciplines. You can refine these terms, and you can see how the yogic traditions, they use certain terms in Sanskrit, but now you can refine them over time. And you can see that there is this beautiful conversation between science and psychology and Vedic science. But when it comes to introspection, we can learn a lot from therapists. We can learn a lot from, literature, especially from literature like Carl Rogers, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, B.F. Skinner, which I'm behaviorism, but we can learn a lot from these different psychologists and the inner workings of the world through dreams. We need not just go to Shastra and say, oh, this happened because of this, and that's the only reason, right? No, that Shastra provides a foundation. The Vedic scriptures often provide a foundation for something, and then obviously, as time progresses, there are people who study into it and provide new theories and deeper versions of it. And so both interact with it. And so I really firmly think that introspection and self-analysis is a powerful component to Vedic science and the yogic sciences, and it needs to be taken more seriously. And I'm not here to dictate people's practices, but as a practice, just reading the scriptures for that matter, I don't see where any of these practices can be effective without introspection, without self-analysis, understanding the self that is eventually what one has to detach from, or one has to really understand when they understand the real self according to these traditions. So I would include, for the matter of academic inquiry, for the matter of self-inquiry, for the matter of, practice, I would include introspection and self-analysis, make it a priority as a yogic practice, and not just include asana and pranayama and ishvara pranidhana. This is a very important component. And in fact, by reading modern psychologists, therapists, their different theories, and of course not taking them necessarily at face value, but reading them, scientific literature that shows what's happening in therapeutic situations, the different types of disorders, the different, personality disorders, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, etc. Their nuances. You're really going to understand the self, or yourself, or other selves for that matter. But fundamentally speaking, you have phenomena that are occurring within you. And it's important to identify them, where they're coming from, why they're happening. And so Yep. So that's about it for now. And I think I'll talk more about the different metaphysical frameworks that we ascribe when we are having phenomenological experiences next. So thank you.